Coming up.
When you've lived under the patriarchy, you feel entitled to a lot of things. We're starting to see the patriarchy crumble because we're starting to see more control over women. We're seeing it in the stripping of abortion rights. We're seeing it in the discussion of ending no-fault divorce. Women have woken up. This message is getting out there that marriage and motherhood is not beneficial to them with the current men that are available.
Hey y'all.
Hey mamas.
Welcome back to Raising Mama.
I'm Megan.
And I'm Chelsea.
I'm a divorced mama of 2 toddlers sharing custody while running my own business.
And I'm a full-time nurse, pregnant with my second baby and married to a stay-at-home dad.
Join us while we talk about the most pressing issues related to postpartum and new parenthood. This podcast is brought to you by Raising Mama, a bamboo baby brand dedicated to empowering moms during postpartum and raising awareness about maternal mental health. Raising Mama's buttery soft bamboo pajamas aren't just designed to help babies sleep better, they're made to support mothers too. And for every pair sold, a portion of the proceeds is donated to Postpartum Support International. As a thank you for listening, enjoy 20% off your next order with code RaisingMamaVillage at checkout, because we're all in this together. Okay, so today we've got a really juicy episode because we're talking about some controversial topics, which I feel like they shouldn't be controversial. But we're going to talk about some seriously feminist shit, specifically the division of labor, domestic labor in households and marriages, and all of the gender equality that exists. And I know this is a postpartum podcast. I feel like this is a really big issue, though. Certainly one that's close to heart, with me and my life and where I'm at in my life right now. So I thought, like, who better to bring on than Abby Eckel, who is this, she's like a self-proclaimed yapper. I found her on Instagram. Chelsea, you're familiar with her. And her tirades on Instagram, but not only that, they're tirades, but I don't mean that in a bad way. She's a very passionate speaker about this issue, and she's so well read and so knowledgeable. And yeah, we need to officially just dig deep into this topic and talk about it. So, Chelsea, I know that you have a excellent division of labor in your house. So how do you feel chatting about this today?
You know, what I really think this might be about more today is gender norms, but also feminism. And I wanted to ask you, do you have a definition of feminism? Do you think you're a feminist? Because I get very lost on that word. But I know that Abby, she's proclaimed feminist. And so
here's the thing. Feminism gets a bad rap, right? But there's been many different waves of feminism. And I'd say I identify as a 4th wave feminist because it's evolved over time. It started in the beginning to accomplish certain things. And then as time went on and laws got passed and things happened for women, it's changed and it's evolved into what it is today. So the definition of 4th wave feminism, and when they say it began around the early 2010s. So it makes sense that I would identify with it because that's when I was in my early 20s. But it focuses on issues such as sexual harassment, sexual violence, the objectification of women, and it advocates for equal pay, challenges traditional gender roles, and broadens its focus also to include the LGBTQ plus community and people of color. So that's kind of, I think, where I'm at, where Abby's at, probably where you're at. And it's an important lens to look at stuff through, at least in my opinion, because these are women's issues. Postpartum is a women's issue.
Right.
And I think also that, see, here's the thing about the domestic labor divide. I just feel like it's something that, and motherhood is the same way. I just feel like it spans like such a diverse group of people. And I feel like we can, even though we might not all agree on everything, I think we try to be like an objective podcast because we don't want to like push people away that are here for like information about postpartum and postpartum support. But at the same time, like, I do think the domestic labor divide happens in across the political spectrum, and it pisses women off across the political spectrum. So that's what I want, like, kind of the energy of this episode to be, is that like, okay, like, no matter what your political preference is, this is real. It is happening. And in most cases, not all cases, in most cases, it causes frustration for the woman and the mother.
Yeah, if anything, I think it's definitely interesting to get the viewpoint of like a full-blown feminist on basically having a baby, getting married,
Yes.
gender norms, gender roles, because even if it maybe someone's more like me, where it's like, I'm certainly not like, I don't like women. I love women. But I also somehow associated feminism with like, I don't like men. And I'm like, well, that's not true. So I think it's going to be really interesting hearing from her today, because I want to see what that perspective is and how much I connect or not connect with it, and how much it probably influences my day-to-day life. Because yeah, I don't know. I feel I'm not as educated as you, Megan.
Well, it's like that classic thing is like, you don't become passionate about something until you've like really been affected by it. And I can like without a doubt say that I have been affected by the domestic labor divide. It was so prominent in my household growing up, and also in my marriage. So although definitely not as bad. I will give credit where credit's due, but it's definitely something I'm passionate about. And yeah, let's hear what she has to say.
Let's dive in.
Before we dive in, hit the subscribe button for more expert insights and honest conversations on Raising Mama podcast.
Today, we're thrilled to have Abby Eckel with us, a bold, unapologetic voice for gender equality in the home. With over 600,000 followers on TikTok and 70,000 followers on Instagram, Abby is known for her feminist, often controversial videos that expose the unfair division of domestic labor. Her work sparks important conversations about the hidden costs women face in marriage and motherhood, earning support from women and criticism from men. Abby also co-hosts the podcast On the Same Page with Paige Turner, where they help couples navigate essential conversations before making major life decisions. So let's jump into these important topics and let's go meet Abby. All right. Welcome to the show, Abby.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Hey, so I'm so excited to have you on the show, and I like stumbled upon you on Instagram, and I was going through a separation at the time, which was by and large like due to many of the stuff that you were talking about. And so it hit home. I think I like kind of attached a little bit more than other people were, just because it was so validating. And I actually like, I wish that I had, stumbled upon it sooner. But I think this topic is gaining momentum. So I'm stoked to talk to you about it today, to pick your brain. And I guess like we'll kind of get started diving into it.
Dive right in.
Like what inspired you to start talking about this so publicly and so truthfully? Like how did the ball get rolling on it? Because I can imagine it'd be kind of scary at first.
Yes. Yeah. It wasn't as scary at first. I was a much smaller creator at the time. But I think really what happened was back in like 2019, like pre-pandemic, I remember like talking to some of our neighbors, and we were like new in our neighborhood. And at the time, my husband and I would like switch off making dinner and putting the boys to bed. And so one night, like my husband was just out in the front, like playing with all the kids. We have this great little cul-de-sac with a bunch of kids. And they were like, where's Abby? He's like, oh, it's her night to cook. And then I'd be out there and they'd be like, where's Mike? And I'm like, oh, it's his night to cook. It's his night to put the kids to bed. And they were like, what? Your husband cooks? And I was like, yes. He also does bedtime and bath time. And at the time I was like your quintessential influencer, like striving to be influencer. But it never felt right. Like it never felt like a good fit for me. I didn't want to try to sell people clothes and outfits and beauty products. I wanted to share the things that I'd gone through in pregnancy and childbirth. And so I was like, God, this just doesn't feel right. And then the pandemic hit and I joined TikTok. I do social media full time. And I was like, gosh, I really need to get on here, like for the sake of knowing it for my clients. I was like, this is a young person's game. But I got on and I joined and I started talking about like how my husband and I share chores and how we care for our kids. And everybody was like, what? What do you mean? Like, what do you mean your husband, does bedtime, does bath time, takes kids to doctor's appointments, is, active and participative? And I was like, oh, there's a really big gap here. And I was going to therapy and my therapist was like, hey, have you read Fair Play by Eve Rodsky? And I was like, no. And I just like devoured it and was like, holy shit, this is so much deeper than just, inequities of, oh, my husband doesn't put the kids to bed at night or he doesn't cook any meals. This was deep and it was costly in the way of like monetary value, in the way of women's mental health and, health conditions. It was just this giant gaping wound that like the more I picked and the deeper I got, the bigger it was. And I just I found this need for women to hear this information, because when you think about it, like nobody told me this. This wasn't the model that I saw growing up in my home. It wasn't an egalitarian marriage that I saw set as an example for me. And I was like, women really need to know that this is not how it should be. And I've pretty much never shut up about it since.
Thank God,
Mhm.
because I also didn't have, like, when I grew up, my parents had super traditional gender roles, and my mom pretty much did everything for my dad. And I watched that and I just thought it was normal. And I feel like I'm speaking for myself, but I think other women too go through this like shift in thinking where it goes from normal to like there's like kind of a what the fuck moment where you're like all of a sudden realizing, wait a second, like this isn't fair. And it's just like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, why are we kind of so, it's like we're programmed. It's not like, I always knew it sucked as a kid. Like even as I was like ironing his handkerchiefs for my dad, and like we had to fold his socks like a special way. Like we couldn't just like put them on top of each other and roll it up. We had to like first put one half inside out so that like when he put it was like ridiculous stuff. So I knew it sucked, but for some reason I like took it as a badge of honor when I entered, my first long-term relationship. So like, what do you think is happening in women's brains when they kind of like make this shift?
I think we hear from a very young age that we are only as good as the domestic labor that we can provide to a man. I remember like a very vivid moment when I was like at my high school boyfriend's house, and we'd been in a relationship for 2 years or so, and he was getting ready to go off to college, and I was still like a sophomore, and I was like helping him like move clothes around, and his mom was like, oh, who's going to take care of your clothes? Who's going to remind you how to fold your jeans correctly when you're gone? Abby's not going to be there. And I was like, what? I was like, what do you mean? Like, he's almost an adult. Like he can't know how to like hang up his jeans properly. But it's just it's and so often we feel like when we get into, I think, relationships with men, we have to prove ourselves, like we have to prove our worth, because one, we're taught that like our main goals in life is to get married and have kids. So once we get a man, we've got to keep a man. And how do we keep a man? We show our worth. We prove ourselves. Oh, I got to make myself to where you can't live without me. You can't manage without me. So sometimes it's like we're self-inflicting this wound that we don't even know that we're doing, because it's been so deeply ingrained in us to do it, that we just get together with men and we unintentionally, and even like maybe not even consciously, start taking that on. Oh, I start picking up his apartment. Oh, I'm folding his laundry for him. And a lot of times we see it as like out of love. Like this is an act of love. Like we are trying to be helpful. We're trying to be, this is us trying to anticipate everybody else's needs all the time. And it's probably not so bad in those early stages. One, because things are great. You're in the honeymoon phase. It's working. It's lovely. But then, throw in a kid. And it's not just his stuff and your stuff you're doing. Now you're in charge of a whole other human. And I think for a lot of women, that is when the switch goes off. And you're like, all of this time, none of this was ever being reciprocated to me. And I didn't notice it back then because it wasn't so prevalent. But now I'm still expected and having to do it for him, as well as all of this other stuff for this tiny human being. And we really start to like feel that crushing weight. And then you throw in societal expectations for mothers and women specifically, and how unbalanced it is. And it's a real clusterfuck.
You know what came to my mind, Abby, when you were talking is dating culture. Because Megan, you were speaking to like childhood and the people that influence you, right? Without directly talking to you. But man, when I think about when I really start to like bloom gender identity, it's like middle school, right? Where like the whole world revolves around like, does a boy like you? Or and then your 20s, right? Like the crazy crap you do in your 20s. You're like, I got to go to a bar 5 times a week till 3 a.m. because maybe I'll meet somebody who, drinks too much and wants to give me a ride on a dangerous bike. Like you're just this poured thing out in the universe. And it's almost like there's nothing, like the whole movie or show Sex and the City is so popular because it's like there's this almost like moment in your life where the entire world revolves around like, do you have a relationship? And I think the big thing that maybe, at least in this Western culture, is like you're trying so desperately to be picked. Like we're trying to be picked versus be the picker. And I think that puts you in such a crazy mindset because you're like, well, I want to look good. Well, I want to be the number one picked person. I want to show, so if you're trying to please, if you're trying to be picked, and this is like your number one goal in life, then yeah, you're going to do all these extra things, just like at work, right? Like if you wanted to get a promotion, you'd be like, yeah, like I love being on the sports, softball team on the weekends and doing this work for free and always having my phone. I mean, it's like, that's great, except for what happens when you get picked. You have to still do all that crap and then be the CEO or whatever of the company. So I think that maybe too, like the gender norms and the social norms around dating almost make it impossible to get into that relationship as like equals, as egalitarians. And then it's like the big shift is certainly maybe once you're married, but certainly once you have a kid, you're like, well, we're in this. So here's the real me. I actually don't like doing softball every weekend on my days off. And I can't actually, answer my phone or, for the more traditional roles with men, right? It might be like, oh yeah, like I just love to have sex 7 times a week and I do all this stuff, and I love to just cut my sleep and cook gourmet meals 10 times a day. And yeah, I don't mind giving them, it's like there's all these things that you like. It's not that they're not true, But there's this whole other part of life that becomes way more important than, do you just have a relationship? Are you a good mother? Are you providing? How is your health doing? How is, your family, your mother? Like, there's more important things than just your relationship. But I think in your tweens and your 20s, it's like the message is, this is all that's most important to you being happy in the world. And you just do whatever you can to be picked. In my experience, I'm sure there's many other people that this is not true, but anyway, that's what came to my brain of like, God, yeah, you're gonna start off on the wrong foot almost and unimaginably.
Yeah. I agree. I think there's like, I know it's like, I don't know the word, like silly, cliche, but like there's a reason that people say like relationships work out when he is more in love with you than you are with him.
I've been
And not
hearing that
that,
a lot lately.
like, it's just, it's so interesting. Like, I think back to like when I met my husband, who like, a couple weeks before I had sworn off like dating. I was done. I had like came out of like a 5-year relationship and I walked right into like trying to date and be with another guy because I was just dying for male validation because I had been, just drained of it for my 5-year relationship. It was a horrible relationship. It was mentally and verbally abusive. And I wanted somebody to validate me and to love me. And I searched for it in all the wrong places. And all I heard was like, you got to find a husband. You got to find a husband. Your clock is ticking. Tick, 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 tick. And I was like and I was doing it all wrong. Of course. I was like, I'll be the pick me girl. I'll do what you want. I'll listen to your shitty music and have bad taste and, come to your house at 3 a.m, like an idiot. Like I look back and I could literally just smack the shit out of myself because I was so angry at her. But and so when I met my husband, he was like, he had been watching me. Like, it sounds kind of weird now, but he's like, I saw you at that bar quite a few times. He's like, I was checking you out for a while before I made my move. And I was like, okay, weirdo. Like, okay. And so, but when he finally did, there wasn't any games. Like, the man called me the next day. He was like, let's go out. I want to take you out. And it was like so refreshing because I was like, I am not faltering on my standards now. Like, this is what it is. This is what I want. And I will not falter anymore. But like to get out of that mindset, to like get on the other side of that mountain, it's not an easy thing, especially in your 20s.
Yeah, you know what this like reminds me of, because I think that this conversation about gender roles and everything and equity in like domestic labor, I think it really is just like a conversation about the dynamic between men and women, because it all flows together, like from the father-daughter relationship to the dating relationship, finding a partner, and then like what the marriage becomes. And so one thing that with your content, I mean, guys get so freaking triggered. Like they get so triggered, and like it's really hard to like just not scroll through the comments, and it's entertaining, but it's also, I get triggered watching them get triggered, And like why do they get so triggered? Like in my head, they're they're listening back to like the last argument they had with like an ex-girlfriend, or like they're remembering, all of these conversations that they've already had with women, and they're just like they're still mad at that girl, and now they're just like taking it out on you. Like why do they get so triggered?
I wish I had an easy answer for this. It's very, I believe it's very, very nuanced. And, all the reading I've done, all the, people I've talked to, all the men I've encountered, all the women I've encountered, like my own life experiences. And I think like it's hard because so many of these men don't see and aren't aware of the subliminal conditioning and messaging that they themselves have received from the get-go. Like to essentially see women as bad, see being feminine as bad, see being womanly or being a woman as less than being a man. It's in the ways and we raise them. You can't have pink stuff. You can't have baby dolls. You don't paint your fingernails. You don't do anything that could remotely resemble femininity because it's bad. Therefore, woman, bad. Boy, good. Man, good. Woman, bad. Like that's just the natural connection that people would make. And it only gets more prominent as you get older and as boys develop and the messaging that they're hearing. And I think it's just when you've lived under the patriarchy, you feel entitled to a lot of things. And I've said it for a while now. We're starting to see the patriarchy crumble because we're starting to see more control over women. We're seeing it in take the stripping of abortion rights. We're seeing it in the discussion of ending no-fault divorce. Women have woken up. This message is getting out there that marriage and motherhood is not beneficial to them with the current men that are available. And we're pulling back and we're living for ourselves. We're going to school. We're getting degrees. We're outpacing men. We're out earning men. We're owning more homes. We're happier. We're single. And the same is not said for men. And they're feeling that.
All right, we're going to pause the show for just a minute because I want to share something personal with you. After having my first baby, I felt completely unprepared for how challenging postpartum life would be. I quickly realized that society just doesn't give moms the support we deserve. That's why I created Raising Mama, to make those early days just a little bit easier. Raising Mama pajamas are made from the softest bamboo fabric, engineered with micro gaps to help babies sleep better and give mamas a much needed boost. The prints feature uplifting messages like, "Mama, I wished for you," and "It's okay to ask for help." Phrases that are meant to prevent those negative thought cycles that so many of us struggle with during postpartum. And because you're a listener of this podcast, I want to give you a special 20% off with the code Raising Mama Village. Plus, every time you buy a pair, we donate $1 to Postpartum Support International to support maternal mental health. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. Now let's get back to the show.
And when you've always grown up believing that you are entitled to just have to work and you'll get a wife who will do whatever you want because that's what they saw their fathers do. That's what they saw their grandfathers do. That's what they saw their mothers do. And now suddenly women are openly speaking about the oppression that they've endured and the negativity because why the hell not? Like we're so tired of being quiet and silenced and they're feeling that now and they simply cannot take it. Men have never had to do any sort of self-reflection, of accountability. And now women are like, I'm done. I'm done. Like, and we're speaking about it. And there's that saying where it's like, when you've been the one oppressing, equality, demanding of equality now feels like oppression to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah. It's so nuanced.
Yeah,
like
saying that women basically are ready for a change, right? And they're like, from the mountaintops, let's look it together. We're ready, And then it's sort of like, and again, I'm saying very broad strokes here. I know that
Yeah.
people are all just gender identity, women, male, cis, and there's a whole spectrum here, but I'm just broad stroking this. And so, but yet men are kind of behind, like, what? I didn't sign up for a change, like everything was fine. And so there's like a disconnect sort of happening. And like, okay, this is no longer working on this side of the equation. And we're kind of like, okay, so you ready to change? And they're like, no, I didn't get the memo. I'm not ready to change. And then on top of that, what I think could be really challenging if you were some male normative person that we're kind of making this paradigm of. If every other, say, like you encountered somebody like me in my 20s, I'm playing up the stereotype. So like everyone you might be meeting, everything you might be experiencing is the opposite. So you're like, I don't know how to agree with you because my whole life is telling me the opposite, So that must be equally as confusing, I imagine, to be like, you want me to change, but the world I live in isn't changing and everything I'm experiencing doesn't match with what you're saying. I mean, I feel like that would make me just be like, Person's
Yeah.
nuts.
So like the one of the problems I have is, and like both or that I had in the past working within a very like misogynistic environment, at least as far as like my superiors, and then also my marriage. And now it's more like, when I'm dating or just, I don't know, discussing this topic with people, is like, how much do you think it's worth trying to kind of convince a man of your point, or I guess a woman too, or like otherwise? Because I just feel like it's like I get so tired. And even, even if it's with your partner, like I have friends that, you know, have partners that are Trump supporters, and they're dealing with, very kind of difficult issues at home, and they have daughters, and the husband just like won't budge, and like it can be so frustrating, and it can really make you feel like pretty helpless, because you're like, maybe if I can just find a way to like explain it, if I can just come up with like the right metaphor so that they can understand like what my inner world is like, you know?
Yeah. Um, it's funny because Paige and I are very like yin to my yang. She's the sweet to my salty. Um, I will tell you to get a divorce. um, she is not so forthcoming, and it's not that we differ greatly on the issues. I am under the belief that you simply you cannot make someone have empathy. You cannot teach someone empathy. And I think that's what a lot of men lack. They don't, these things have never affected them, and they've never had to try to understand the effects of them. And if you can't like put yourself in somebody else's shoes, which is literally empathy, they're not going to care. And why what is the inclination for men to change when it means more work for them to do so? You know, it doesn't, nah, I'd rather kind of keep it as it is because I'm still going to benefit from it. It's still very, very beneficial for them to hold the beliefs that they have and to live the way that they live in these very gendered, stereotypical roles. I, because the problem is we tell women, oh, just reward him for putting the dishes away. Be sure that you're, giving him positive reinforcement. And this is still back on the woman, even though it's not the woman's problem. It's still back on her to have to figure out and manage and do and push for and beg for. There is no amount of communicating that's going to likely change someone's mind that doesn't see what you do as valuable, which is a very big problem. I don't believe a lot of men value or respect women because, again, they've been taught from a very young age that women are here and men are here. They are below them, they are beneath them in all values, in all ways. They don't deserve the same respect. The value that they contribute is less than what men do. They don't bring enough to the table. My work is harder. My work is more important. You can't make someone value you. You can't make someone respect you. And I have a hard time with people like, oh, well, when I decided to leave was when he really turned around. Why the fuck did it take him that long to give a shit? Why did it take him so long to see you as important? All this time he didn't care. I have a hard time believing that right now in this instant, he's just gonna fully develop and change as he who he is as a human. Like I don't think there's changing those people unless they come to you and they say, I want to go work through my shit. I want to go to therapy. I want to join groups. I want to read books. I want to take the initiative. I can't force somebody to change, and nobody can.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a fair point, and the sweetness maybe. It would be a trend I see pretty commonly. It's a really interesting. I have two really close friends. One is in her 20s and single, and one is in her 30s and single. And just watching them Who could that be? And watching them date is really interesting because the pool of people that they're drawn to,
You can just say it's me. It's fine.
it's unique, right? Because I see dating through a 20-year-old's perspective, and I see it through like a divorced with kids perspective. And I feel like the men on the 20 somethings, I'm like, there's not even one person that I'm like, oh, I'm like, God, no, like don't don't do it. Don't do it. Like this is, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like, if we all just don't buy apples, they won't sell apples, like if we all just don't pick these bad apples, like men probably stop being, these bad apples or whatever. But there's just something to it
But
where
sometimes they're just juicy, It's hard when you're in your early 20s.
but the dating pool, while much smaller, while they're definitely not as youthful and exciting or whatever, is so much, I think, higher quality when maybe they're like 40, divorced, had a kid, blah blah blah. Because what I feel is
I can contest that doesn't really help much.
well, the mindset that's out there compared to someone in their 20s is, I think, and I could be wrong here, but I think with experience comes wisdom. And if you go through childbirth with your partner and you go through marriage with your partner, and even if you're doing a really crappy job, that wisdom and knowledge that 40-year-old something has kind of gone through the war, didn't they didn't win or whatever, they're divorced, but that mindset is just so profoundly different than maybe somebody just starting out. So I do feel like men learn, grow, they gain wisdom, and they see women differently as they age, for sure, especially if they've had a significant partner in their life and gone through, like, do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, if they've gone through birth, if they've gone through the after phases of raising a kid, if they've gone through like whatever it is, breast cancer, like I do think men are capable of change 100%. I think all people are. But I think to your point, Abby, you can't make somebody change on your timeline. So if you're like at the point where you're like, cool, I now can only, this is where I'm at, and they're just like not interested, there is nothing I think you can do to make somebody change on your timeline. But I do think that I think the majority of men, can love women. I think the majority of men are capable of understanding these concepts. But the time, I think a woman can figure it out at like age 24, and for various reasons, like reasons that make sense. I think it's just so much slower and it requires experience, like you said. Like, unless their world is not being touched by it, then why would they really like care about it so much? I don't know. All right.
Yeah,
Tell
I love that, like, the podcast that you have with Abby, I love how it's about, like, kind of the positive side of things, like how, how to create that change and, like, what to talk to your partner about. So, like, tell us a little bit about that. Like, what if you're listening to this podcast, you're fed up, you maybe have just had a baby, you're going through it, and you're like, you're ready, like, to do something, but maybe some of the, like, conversations that you've had, like, haven't worked. Like, what do you guys recommend? Like, what do we do other than get a divorce? Because I mean, believe me, as a divorced person, I fully support that as well, but, like, not everyone is mentally there yet. It takes time to get like, where you're mentally there.
Yeah. These are all going to be hard. I
It's okay.
I know that, like, from the time a woman decides she's going to leave to the time she files is 2 years. There's a lot of time. And even before
Wow.
that, there's a lot of time that women spend trying to mend things in various ways. Whether that's individual therapy, we know women are much more likely to seek therapy themselves than men are. Lots of stigma for men, naturally. They're still, struggling with that. And I'm going to be honest, I don't have an answer. I don't know what you do when you're not ready to leave, but you have exhausted all other avenues. You have communicated and you've tried fair play, or you've tried counseling. He's tried counseling, or maybe he hasn't. But again, like, you can't force somebody to go to that. You can't force somebody to want to be better for you. And that's kind of like with the podcast, Paige and I have recognized that there are conversations and questions that were never had in the earliest stages of our relationships. And I got lucky. And I'll tell women this every single day. There's no magic formula to finding a good man. There's just not. There's just not. It's not a magic thing. You can't do this, this, and this, and everything's gonna be, rainbows and unicorns. I talk about the things that, like, I did notice about my husband, the conversations we did have, the things that I was able to look back on about what I realized made him a good communicator, a good partner, somebody who was willing to hear me out and validate me and not get defensive on things. But there's so many questions that nobody ever taught us to discuss. And that's what there's another gap there, because women are just taught, again, get married, have babies, get married, have babies, get married, have babies. But what does that mean for everything else in between? And that's what the podcast really tries to discuss, all those different talking points. Do you want to have kids? What's your political stance? How were you raised? What is your parenting style, going to be like? And you can, if you're not parents, you're in the early stages of dating, you can't really say, what's your parenting style? We could say, like, what were your parents like? How were you raised? And because that's, I think, the number one thing couples fight and get divorced about is like finances and like the way people raise their children and the parenting differences. But for the women that are stuck in these positions, again, because there are a lot of them, they're probably the majority of my followers, is what I tell them the most is that this isn't your fault. It's not because you're not trying hard enough. It's not because you're not communicating in the right way. It's not because you're not doing enough. You are doing enough, but you cannot force a horse to drink. You can lead him to the water. You can't force him to drink. So at some point, it has to boil down to you and what you believe to be best for you in this one short life that you have. Only you can make that decision. I'm not going to sit here and tell you you're going to get divorced. Like, I will say, like, I believe in divorce. I think divorce, should absolutely happen, and it should be much more easily attainable than it is. It shouldn't be as costly as it is, but it's also why I'm a proponent for prenups and postnups. But there's no easy answer. I just want women to know that it's not that they can communicate any better or any differently, or that there's some magic formula that will find you a good man or change a good man or change him into a good man. But that's tough to hear.
Yeah. And the thing that makes me sad too is that, like, we're in California, we're pretty progressive over here and stuff, but like in other states, I mean, like the amount of like alienation that you can experience, like just for mentioning some of this stuff, it's really sad, and like you can get really just screwed up from all of it, and it can take a lot more time and effort to be able to work through it. And that it makes me sad. Like all of this is like, it's a heartbreaking thing for me. It's heartbreaking to watch, women sacrifice themselves in the way that they do, especially when they have kids, because then it becomes like a sacrifice for the children, or at least that's how we kind of justify it in our heads. And in my case, I just kind of decided that that was not, like, martyrdom was not a choice that I wanted to make.
That the action step I'm hearing maybe most profoundly is like us. Abby, this is so dumb. You're a mom, yeah? You're not a mom. You are a mom. Okay. Us as mothers, the action step is, right? Since it's very hard to get out of the weeds once you're in them, and there is no secret conversation to figure this stuff out. The action step is, while we're raising our new sons and daughters, is to be a lot more forthright with, hey, these are some really great qualities to look into in a partner. These are some really great questions to actually be asked about. And maybe if we can just, of course you want to be the change you want to see, be the woman that you hope your daughters and sons, would like to be with. That could probably have the most profound influence, I would imagine. And this is just one last random thing. When I was 20, I remember I took this psychology class in community college, and this lady, I remember, she profoundly changed the room. She made us take these questionnaires of like who most likely has like long lasting and like fulfilled marriages and who most likely like wouldn't. It was like this little just like 2-page thing, and
Like about each other, or like, what do you mean?
it was a test. She was like, I want you to tick the boxes where you think these are the types of people who have the best long lasting marriages and these are not.
Okay.
And it was the most awesome thing because to this day, I mean, who knows how realistic these statistics are now, but it was 12 years ago. She was like, if you get married and you're 25 and under, your chances of divorce are 85%. So
Oof,
she was
I believe
like,
that.
age is the number one indication that you're not going to have a successful, happy marriage. She was like, two, if you're actually very different, you have different socioeconomic classes, you have different religious beliefs, you have different financial beliefs, you have different, she was like, actually, people who are like significantly different on core values, those will go down. People who meet primarily through activities where it's drinking, smoking, blah, 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 those go down. And I remember even at 20, I was like, dude, you go, lady. Like, I remember it profoundly affecting, like, and she did this to every single classroom that she had of like, hey, like, guess who's not telling you stuff and I'm going to tell you stuff. And I remember thinking, man, if I ever have like a random position where I get to just put out a little like survey of like, so what do you think you should care about as a 20-year-old something whose like maybe entire worldview is about getting a partner? And that simple quiz, I mean, stuck with me. So I can't imagine if your mother is having these conversations, your father's having these conversations with the sons, with the daughters, with, everybody in between, however you identify. Like you said, the change is coming, and maybe we're in like another transition sort of generation, but the next generation might have a whole other transition that they're working through. So I think the lessons are very valuable.
Yeah. I learned a lot, like, watching your reels and your content and, both I've learned a lot both about why everything pissed me off so much in my own marriage, and so it was validating. And I think that, just like you said, like, because you can't change a person, sometimes validation is kind of the only thing that really helps, but it can help a
Mhm.
lot because it's empowering.
Mhm.
So you're doing the Lord's work. and and yeah, it's just very entertaining, and the comments and it's just wild, the people out there that are alive and well and commenting and exist, and it's a real problem. And
It
It's
is.
yeah,
it's
so
pretty
thank you for
phenomenal.
talking to us about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's phenomenal the responsibility you're taking on because, like I said, I was influenced by one community college teacher who had 20 students. You have 600,000 followers on TikTok, which is primarily younger people. So, it's a tough, tough subject. There's going to be a lot of haters. You're going to, 10 years from now, look back at some of the shit you said and be like, oh my God, but it's like you're
Yes.
trying and there is something that can be done. And it's like, man, way to go for it and try your best to change the social narrative. That's really stinking courageous.
Thank you. I've never been a quiet person, so it really just
Yeah,
it works well for me.
you're a self-proclaimed yapper. I find that like really funny because it's a little bit self-deprecating.
I know. I know. I think I really live by like when you can take an insult and own it, you get to turn it around. You know, like people love to tell mothers that they're selfish. I'll be the first to tell you, fuck yes, I am. I am very selfish. And I should be. Every mother should be. There is nothing, when you own, you get to change the way people view the words that they say to you in a derogatory way. It really changes things. Let me tell you, people don't like it when I tell people that I'm a selfish mother, that I am not fully fulfilled by motherhood. It is not the only thing that fulfills me, nor should it be. And yeah, I have grown up being, you know, I was the mouth of the South, like in my in my class, in my home. I have never been one to be quiet and stand by idly and go with the flow of things. So yeah, this is just it's really worked out for me getting to Gap. You know, I'm gonna keep going.
It really has. Well, on that note, thanks for yapping with us. We loved having you. And best of luck. We'll follow along. Keep it up.
Thank you guys for having me.
Right, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on future conversations. And follow us on Instagram at Raising Mama Podcast for more updates, resources, and a peek behind the scenes. See you next time.